Africa, similar to every continent, has known its share of sad and dark moments in history that we must remember to prevent repeating past errors. Today, the story I will tell is about Samuel Dewey, the president of Liberia, who met a tragic and painful end in every sense of the word. Indeed, on September 9, 1990, Liberia and the world discovered with shock and joy for some the arrest and execution of President Samuel Doe. Dewey had ruled the country with an iron fist for nearly 10 years with support from the United States and Israel, but on that September 9th, he was stripped of all power. Tied up, undressed, and tortured before his execution, his corpse was shown all over the capital, Monrovia. Who was Samuel Dewey? What could he have done to deserve such a tragic fate? But more importantly, what really happened on that Sunday, September 9th? Sep 9. Liberia is a West African country with a very unique history, unlike its neighbors such as Ivory Coast, just to mention one. In fact, Liberia is the result of a blend between indigenous peoples and others. Most came from America, and naturally you might think that throughout your education, you were always told that black people were taken from their land to be deported to the West, to the United States, and so on. Anything you can think of. But let me explain. Between the abolition of slavery and the passing of a law, slavery was abolished in some US states, especially in the North. But you know well that the passing of a law and its implementation is often the result of a long process. And it must be said that 30 or 40 years prior, things had already begun to change. There were black people who were free, and there were those who were freed. In the understanding of some pro-slavery whites, it was inconceivable for them to see black people start to demand the same rights as they had. Black people were starting to do things beyond tasks reserved for slaves, and that's how it goes. In some people's minds, a project named the American Colonization Society emerged. Forgive my English, we'll refer to it as ACS. The goal of this organization was to return ex-slaves, African Americans, and Afro-Caribbeans to their ancestral land, in Africa, if you will. In theory, this project looked quite appealing to the extent that even abolitionists supported it. It was claimed that black people in America, they suffer discrimination, they are mistreated. It would be best for them to find their own kind, to go to their ancestral homeland. And that's how the ACS received backing from the United States. They would purchase land in Africa, in West Africa, near Lake St. Paul, an area that would today be called Liberia. At that time, there were already indigenous people on those lands. The Americans bought those lands, colonized the local populations, and deported about 4,000 people, 4,000 Afro-Americans, 4,000 Afro-Caribbeans, 4,000 Afro-descendants, you see. And these 4,000 individuals arrived. It was quite a project. Buildings were erected and operations were launched. All was arranged for these black people indeed, for wise individuals to settle there. Naturally, such a project was executed with a soft power plan, an ideology driving it. The ideology pushed was that the African Americans who came were better than the blacks who had been there for years. You are more intelligent, more attractive, and better educated. In short, you are the superior blacks. This concept would indeed have great significance in the future of history. However, it should be noted that the United States did not intend to invest heavily in this project because they didn't plan to invest so much in black people. However, this project was becoming quite expensive, so the Americans decided to allow this newly created nation to gain independence and let African Americans lead it. This would be a way to govern it indirectly, and that is exactly what will occur. Nigeria obtains its independence in the early years of independence, becoming one of the first colonized African nations to gain freedom. In any case, in the sub-region, it was, I think, the first country before the major wave of independence that came in those years. So, the independent Liberia, its capital is called Monrovia, named in honor of the 15th President of the United States, who is Mr. Monroe. The flag of Liberia is an exact copy of the United States flag with a starry field. In short, you understand, it's the United States in miniature in West Africa. Know one thing throughout this video. The history of Liberia is inevitably connected to the political affairs of the United States. It's important to know that in April, the Civil War started in the United States. This Civil War was a conflict between the government forces, US forces, led by Mr. Abraham Lincoln back then, who opposed the Confederate States. The Confederate States were the southern states that absolutely rejected the abolition of slavery due to its financial implications, believing that black people should remain enslaved. So, a huge civil war broke out that really led to a lot of deaths in the US. If you pay attention to the news and American politics, at Donald Trump's events, Confederate flags are typically seen because even now, in the southern states of the US, this anti-black sentiment is still deeply rooted. In short, that's not our focus here. Regardless, this will lead around 10,000 African Americans to arrive once more on Liberian territory. Now we arrive in Liberia, a country primarily composed of Afro-descendants, African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, and is largely made up of indigenous groups. However, from the beginning, Afro-Americans were informed that indigenous people are primitive, stupid, ugly, and less intelligent. In short, you understand. So for nearly 100 years, the country was run by Afro-Americans from X to Y. Afro-Americans led the nation through one political party. True Whig Party. I can't translate all of this for you. Whig to me is just a wig, the actual wig of the party. Anyway, I can't translate it in any case. They led the country for over 100 years. No opportunities for the natives. Thus, indigenous people were stuck with very thankless tasks, very ungrateful roles, socially, hesitantly, at the bottom of the ladder, creating resentment and frustration, a hatred that materialized through one man, Mr. Samuel Doe. Who was Mr. Samuel Doe? Samuel Doe was born in a small, unliberated village called Tyson. He was from an ethnic group called the Etrane. He will have an education until the age of 18, when he will enlist in the military. His real goal, if I'm not mistaken, is to earn a scholarship. In any case, as he progresses, he climbs the ranks until mid-nation 7-17, where he is made a lieutenant. He is even trained by the Americans. In mid-nation 1980, following deals, protests, and grievances, he thus decides to launch a coup with around 20 people. He leads the coup to attack President M. William Tolbert's residence, who is an Afro-American. He could have simply staged the coup, imprisoned the president, or forced him into exile, but he will assassinate him. He could have simply killed him, but he will assassinate him, rob him, and bury him in a mass grave where they made sure to kill 27 other people who were there that day in the house. It should be noted that Samuel Dewey has just made his mark in the history of liberalism in the most sinister way, committing one of the darkest crimes. And there, naturally, one could say, all right, it's a coup, he was in the zone, he killed him, it's done. No. In the following day, all the ministers, all the close aides of President William Tolbert will be captured, disrobed, compelled to walk through all of Montreviet Bay before being executed on a beach in the city in front of the locals.
It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. It's not serious, it's not serious. It's fine, it's fine. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. It's fine, 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 it's alright, it's fine, it's alright, it's okay, it's acceptable, it's satisfactory, it's decent, it's acceptable, it's fine, it's alright, it's okay, it's acceptable, it's satisfactory, it's not a problem, it's fine.
It's all right.
It's fine. It's no big deal. It's no big deal. It's no big deal. It's no big deal. It's not a big deal. That's
Mr. Samuel Kenyon Dewey is officially the president of Liberia, and once he takes charge of the country, he makes powerful announcements. He aimed to remain in power for a short time and to give power back to the civilians, but in practice, it will be a very different outcome. Truthfully, Samuel Dewey, upon gaining power, suspends the National Week. He forms the PRC, the People's Redemption Council, which, as its name indicates, is the Redemption Council. With this organization, he foresaw a complete transformation of the country. So, the end of corruption, the end of social inequalities, the economic renewal of the country. In short, in theory, it all sounds great. One must give credit where it's due. Contrary to what some might think, Samuel Dewey is indeed a murderer, a brutal president. However, he wasn't stupid, because a 29-year-old who executes a coup is certainly very clever. He has to have leadership abilities. And during the few times he intervened, it must be said that his remarks were quite consistent and impressive. Therefore, there was still a hint of hope.
That's the reason why. We have to keep promoting this until we recognize that food is crucial for any growth. Without food, you can't achieve anything, even if you have cash. If you lack the means to purchase food, rest assured, in Montreal, the opportunity to buy nourishment is denied. You may receive your wages, yet find yourself unable to consume. Your capabilities diminished greatly. That is the reason we must produce food, allowing us to meet this need. Support other countries.
Samuel Dewey, through the PRC, will appoint all his friends and family to lead this institution. Therefore, the PRC will begin by conducting highly dubious trials. Consequently, all of Samuel Dewey's opponents will face judgment. The fortunate ones will be imprisoned, while the unfortunate will be executed. He will start arresting all journalists who dare to criticize him, and it will genuinely be a regime of fear. But I pointed out one thing at the start of the video. The story of Liberia is always tied to the political events in the United States. We are in the era of the MM, and the United States is fully engaged in the Cold War. They and their little friends are facing the Soviet Union, and it's a war against communism. And we need the antennas of this pro-American ideology across all continents in West Africa. What better place than Liberia? Thus, this alliance between Samuel Dewey and the United States will be born. The United States will indeed host Samuel Dewey several times via President Ronald Reagan. There will be very flattering speeches between the two parties. They will really fall in love. This will materialize through several concrete events. The Americans will have the chance to create their naval base on Liberia's coast. They will also set up the Voice of America radio. Its purpose will be to spread all pro-American ideas. But they will mainly establish the U.S. Embassy, which will truly be a hub for espionage in this constant search for war against communist ideas across the continent. Thus, in contrast to Sékou Touré, who had connections with the Soviet Union, Samuel Dewey will be tight with the Americans, and they will treat him right. They will give Samuel Dewey many forms of aid and loans worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Samuel Dewey intends to utilize all of this assistance. He plans to procure aircraft, acquire secondary residences within the Diaze Union, invest in Swiss properties, and establish accounts overseas. In short, all this was done with the Americans fully aware. Ronald Reagan even called Samuel Dewey an excellent president. In short, you see, it's a strong love, and Samuel Dewey will return to the Americans all the favors they did for him. It's worth noting that he shut down the Libyan embassy, which was in Liberia. He cut down the staff at the Soviet embassy in Liberia, all very notable acts to demonstrate his affection for the US. So it's a passionate love between these two nations. He also has the protection of the CIA. And when you're under CIA protection, believe me, it brings many troubles for others. Whatever the case, you grasp the context. It's a strong love between the US and Samuel Dewey, and he thinks he's truly invincible. However, at a certain time, the Americans told Samuel Dewey, "Okay, friend, we support you in all your actions, but really, help us help you." That's when the complaints started. Hold the elections. Even if you win, it's no big deal. Hold the elections. If you're just visiting, that's okay. But at least, hold the elections. It will give the impression that there's a semblance of democracy. He follows their guidance closely, and in November in Liberia, he arranges the first elections. The elections he holds are organized. Except Samuel Dewey did not take into account some very important factors: the opponents. Among the opponents, there were some very serious challenges, including one you surely know, Helen Johnson Sirleaf, who served as the last president of Liberia before the current president, George Weah. Helen Johnson Sirleaf is someone special. She studied in the US, graduated from Harvard, and her ancestor was the first president of Liberia. She was a minister and counselor during the True Party League's era. So she knows her business and has a lot of popularity. Samuel Dewey doesn't dwell on it. He has no time for TGVC. He imprisons Helen Johnson Sirleaf and locks her up for 10 years. Yet he will set her free later. He didn't take her life because Helen Johnson Sirleaf is an American plus. And this will be one of the first moves that causes small tensions between the United States and Samuel Dewey. Because Helen Johnson Sirleaf is an American asset, the unfolding events will support my claims about Liberia's history. Regardless, he wins the election with 51% of the vote. In summary, you see the results are very disputed. The results face major doubts about cheating. But Samuel Dewey pays no mind. Who would be brave enough to oppose him? What he ignores is that his assassinations have truly created a growing unpopularity among the population. So much so that even among his close associates there are people who resent him. Among them is Thomas Kiwampa, a former comrade of Samuel Dewey. He was even offered the chance to lead the PIR if he turned it down. Thus, he is going to try to stage a coup against Samuel Dewey. At first, the coup appears to be progressing well because he takes control of the radio, the television, and an army barracks. Thus, he broadcasts a message on the radio declaring that he is now the president. In summary, things are looking quite good for him. Yet Samuel Dewey has the backing of the US, and that alone is enough to solve all problems. Soon he regains the advantage, and in the process, he apprehends Thomas Kiwampa. This is to send a strong message to anyone who might think about to launch a coup against him. Thomas Kiwampa is killed. Ordered. Some intimate parts are cut off. Eaten by the troops of Samuel Dewey. I'm serious. Cannibalism during Liberia's dark period is not a myth. It's true. And the rest, in any case, what remains of his body, is displayed in order to convey a powerful message. But that's not it. One must understand that Thomas Kiwampa, at the time he tried his coup d'etat, though he said the coup was done, the people from his region, the Nimba region in Liberia, took to the streets. They protested and were glad. Samuel Dewey sent his troops to handle this. These soldiers carried out a massacre, with estimates of around 600 to 1,500 casualties. And this massacre was committed, created a major tribal divide nationwide. The Kran, Samuel Dewey's ethnicity, but not always the majority, essentially constituted the army of Samuel Dewey. The other ethnicities started to develop a sense of resentment and hatred, and this was truly one of the earliest occurrences, issues that have causing Samuel Dewey's downfall. I had told you that the actions of Samuel Dewey, they caused his downfall. They created an atmosphere leading to failure. Let me explain. In addition to being a bloodthirsty president, he was a very bad president, a terrible manager, because Liberia was among the poorest nations of that era. Liberia faced increasing misery among its people, while Samuel Dewey and his inner circle enjoyed riches, a wealth that is truly indescribable. And I have also mentioned one thing. It's that the tale of Liberia has always been tied to current affairs in politics in the US. We are in the Cold War period. And in the year of the Cold War is starting to become ancient history. The United States is busy fighting other wars around the world. And is it really necessary to spend millions funding a small war against communism on the African continent? I doubt it. And as an African proverb says, when you want to kill your dog, you say it has rabies. The Americans, who have always blindly given money to Samuel Dewey, who have always seen him plunder and appropriate the country's resources, have finally chosen to send in experts to review the expenditures of Dewey's government. What a surprise. And these experts will, at the end of their review, clearly find that things are not okay. Moreover, the World Bank is dealing with many problems in Liberia. Thus, they decided to stop all aid to Samuel Dewey. And in the Cold War era, the Americans decided to stop all financial aid to Samuel Dewey. On top of that, they also withdrew some military support. This will create a certain fragility in Samuel Dewey's power, also revealing his ambitions. And of course, all of this will give confidence to all of Samuel Dewey's enemies who were lurking in the shadows. And believe me, there were many enemies. But among all these enemies, we will only focus on two. Indeed, just two. And these two had a common link. They were all close associates of Samuel Dewey. First up is Mr. Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor is a man who was a minister or advisor under Samuel Dewey. And he had been arrested, tried, and accused of embezzling nearly $900 million. So he fled to the United States, where he was arrested and imprisoned, and he escaped from an American prison. Just that alone shows that the guy is not very easy to deal with. He returns to Liberia with a massive strike force. He possesses the arms, he has the troops, and he is determined to take down Samuel Dewey. That is truly Charles Taylor. On the flip side, there's Prince Johnson. Prince Johnson is another type. He has significantly less money, he has fewer soldiers, he has fewer weapons, but he is more cunning, he is more deceitful, and he is more sly. And you will understand this as events unfold. Thus, we have two significant enemies of Samuel Dewey poised to strike at the president. The Americans are also beginning to distance themselves from Samuel Dewey. Bam! In July of that year, fighting starts between Charles Taylor's troops and Samuel Dewey's government forces. The government forces are attacked in all forms. However, they have no choice, because they know very well that if they lose to Charles Taylor's forces, their fate will be tragic. They have killed people in the Nimba regions. They killed ethnic groups other than their own, other than theirs. Thus, they are in a conflict that is beyond politics. It is a tribal war. So, the clashes are so violent that there are thousands of deaths. The worst is that the fighting is so intense that civilians in Monrovia flee to take refuge in a church. And Samuel Dewey's troops will go into that church and massacre those who have taken refuge. We're talking about around 600 people, men, women, and kids. In this situation, ECOWAS chooses to meet several times in Bangui, meetings like always. But this time, ECOWAS will take action. ECOWAS has a card for the doc that it has used very few times on the African continent. It's the ECOMORG. The ECOMORG, if you want, is the military force of ECOWAS. It has nothing to do with the UN or Blue Helmets, nor with those who come often but shoot rarely. The ECOMORG, when it shoots, does so with extreme force. Thus, they will decide to deploy ECOMORG troops in the liberated territory. We're talking about approximately 4,000 men, led by Mr. Anol, Kiona, I can't pronounce his name. Anyway, this general really looks like the ECOMORG. So it's really chaos in Liberia. Everyone is attacking. It's a wasp's nest everywhere. In short, everyone wants Samuel Dewey's head. And in that context, Prince Johnson, very tactical, very treacherous, very crafty, will seize an opportunity he couldn't have had. There are dissidents in Chalta-Lorraine, troops from Chalta-Lorraine fully armed. There are dissidents. Thus, these dissidents will come to him to strengthen his troops. And with these dissidents, he will succeed in getting through the nets to get to, in Monrovia, the capital. In this context, everyone is fighting, everyone is attacking. Prince Johnson starts to ascend the ranks without anyone seeing. That, on September 9th, 1990, we learn on television the killing of Mr. Samuel Dewey. What actually occurred on that Sunday, September 9th? We'll find out in this last section of the video. So, Before recounting what happened on September 9th, 1990, I need to set the stage. It's important to know that this video is the result of 2 to 3 weeks of intense research, because I have known this story since I was a child. But I also needed to corroborate everything with research. These are not just copied notes. It took reconstructing several sources to achieve coherence. And on that September 9th, 1990, there are two versions that stand out. The first version is this: Samuel. Around 1 p.m., Dewey left his house and went to the locomotive base to meet General Arnold Cano. And right after, Johnson's police came with his crew. They assaulted him. They murdered Samuel Dewey. And that's the story. However, I find this version inconsistent, irrelevant, with many unspoken elements and gaps. There is a second version. I saw this in a documentary released on VHS in the late 90s. I was 9 then. My dad had it. I watched it, but I didn't fully understand it. I saw it again at 15. And later, when I created this YouTube channel, I got the idea for this video. I started searching. I found the archives. This version seems much more plausible to me, especially because there are very significant moving testimonies from those who were present that day. Thus, I will share this version with you as it appears far more pertinent to me than the last. In this version, given that there was a very tense atmosphere in Liberia, with all the troops clashing, the ECOWAS, through General Anol, who was the general of the Locomorgues, managed to organize a meeting between Samuel Doe and Prince Johnson to negotiate a ceasefire, peace, everything you can imagine. On September 9, 1990, at around 1 p.m., Samuel Doe departs from his home as he has stopped going out. He's received in his palace considering the current climate, and he reaches the base location of Locomorgues, along with approximately 80 individuals. They ascended to General Anol's office, awaiting the arrival of Prince Johnson. So Prince Johnson arrives with his guys. The atmosphere is quite relaxed. Greetings, hugs.
That is indeed true, Frank Johnson. And didn't have many weapons. Chattier was the only one with all those weapons. Johnson used a shooter because he didn't have enough machine guns. But later, Johnson had everything. I guess the U.S. gave Johnson the weapons.
The letter C. It was one guy. Fascinating.
Frank Johnson was heading to the military checkpoint to meet with the Army to stop the war, as he said he would do. All right, now they're making introductions, shaking hands, the Army. People, it's like a setup. Like a setup. He attempts to express that he no longer desires war, that he just wants to make peace.
They enter the office and the meeting begins. During the meeting, it's quite cordial, even warm. There are promises of peace, promises of protection. Samuel Doe assures Prince Johnson that he will not attack. They embrace and there's warm applause.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and...
Serious.
It's not good. They managed to choreograph the team.
Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, please gather here. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, 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 it's the third time that I say to you, members of the technician, that I'm very pleased to be in this office, to meet the best freedoms, so we can help each other.
But There are three main characters. While there are over 10 people in the room, three are the key protagonists. Anol Keino, General of the Locomorgues, Prince Johnson, and Samuel Doe. Among these three, there is one, at least one person, who knows of the very dark events of the day. They wrap up the meeting. Prince Johnson exits. As he leaves, he gestures to his men to attack. His men will attack Samuel Doe's troops. About 80 men are all taken down. There are clashes, several deaths, but overall, they gain the upper hand over Samuel Doe's men. And then he tells his guys, go up, go get him. So they head up. Upon hearing the gunfire, Samuel Doe asks the general, what's going on? The general says, no, stay calm. Don't worry, it's fine. And the most troubling part of all this is that there were never any confrontations between the Locomorgues men and Prince Johnson's men. There were only clashes between Prince Johnson's guys and Samuel Doe's guys. There was no resistance. They didn't try to... They blocked him. They accessed the office and came to arrest Samuel Doe. At that moment, Samuel Doe was surprised. So Prince Johnson, you told me we were coming for peace. What's going on? Prince Johnson is there drinking his beers, sitting back, being fanned by a young woman acting as a makeshift fan, as Samuel Doe is restrained, naked. I assume Prince Johnson's soldiers were under the influence. One of the individuals gets a knife, specifically a machete, while inebriated and proceeds to sever both hands. Ears. Another is chewing on his genitals, literally crushing them. Samuel Doe can be heard screaming, gasping. Meanwhile, Prince Johnson drinks his beers, watching the scene as if he were watching a classic film. Samuel Doe will face torture. They will demand his bank account numbers during the torture, ask for the locations of his allies, and how to protect himself. And the torture will last for quite a while. The whole will be filmed, aired for the nation. When it's all over, Samuel Doe will be killed. There will be intimate areas that will be severed, just as he used to do. One problem is that he could have been injected with formaldehyde to secure that in order to delay the decomposition process and allow his body to remain in Monrovia for an extended period, similar to his usual practice. His body was shown, Samuel Doe was killed, to the whole world. And this is the tale of a man who possesses, ruled by terror, and who ended in terror. I share this story with you for two specific reasons. Because we represent the future generation, the one that will lead and govern this continent. And it is important for us to know our history, to understand the mistakes of our predecessors. One must know that when you are a governor, when you are a leader, you can have a people who are not driven by a will for profit, a will for hatred, but through perseverance. To push him to the limit, to push him into the final corners, to feed him with hate and frustration, he becomes a demon on his feet. The second reason is that I spoke with a friend lately who mentioned a rise in coups across Africa. And I told him that if he looked into it, he would see that, without encouraging coups, the approach has changed a lot. In most of the coups we've seen lately, there is no shedding of blood, and that is commendable. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please do subscribe, because this is a lot of research work, a lot of reconstruction work, a lot of editing work, it's a lot of filming work. So subscribe generously, comment, share. That's how we can suggest topics together. And on Sunday, not this coming Sunday, but the one after, there's an episode of my podcast. But the Sunday after that, we'll do another video on a different subject, perhaps much less dark than this one. Until then, stay well, subscribe, and drink some tea. And I hope the video wasn't too shocking for you. See you later.